Well, good evening, Livingston. Wow, what a gas to be here. After Karachi, Islamabad, Lahore, Mumbai, Delhi, Damascus, Aleppo, Beirut, Cairo, Istanbul, and now Livingston. I haven't missed a beat. Just right up there with the world capitals. No, don't get too excited back there. It's getting warm up here already. See, I tell certain messages because I don't want to attract attention to myself. I try to wear really bland t-shirts such as "Don't trust the corporate media," which is actually not really accurate because you can trust them to lie, to fabricate, to deceive, to mislead you, to propagandize you, to turn you into a consumer, which is the ultimate goal of the entire system. So we have a media in this country that's now controlled by 5 corporations, whose main purpose is to dumb down the population, to keep you in a state of absolute fear. Our latest, the enemy du jour is now ISIS. Where did ISIS come from? We never heard of them just months ago, but now they're the new threat, and that's why we have to go to scareports to get on frights, patted down by TSA officials. That's thousands standing around. And our basic rights are being abrogated, curtailed, restrained, Constitution being shredded, Bill of Rights being eviscerated, all in the name, incidentally, of protecting our rights. So you have to get this Orwellian doublethink clear in your head. You have to sacrifice your rights in order to protect them. That's the doublethink equation. We are, countering the hegemonic Amazonian presence of Jeff Bezos and other few corporate CEOs that have literally cleansed the landscape of many independent bookstores all across the country. I can't tell you in community after community where, we used to have an independent bookstore, and now we don't. It's a sad spectacle, and hats off to the people here. I'm sure worked very hard to get you books and to keep this whole operation going. So treasure this resource. It's an island of independence, literary independence, and there's some wonderful fiction here as well. And I always like to read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness or Melville's Moby Dick. If you want to understand U.S. imperialism and the nature of violence and the extractive nature of capitalism, you can look in fiction. You don't have to read Noam Chomsky. Often, Barbara Kingsolver has a great new novel out called Flight Behavior, which I think captures that entire mania about resource extraction and profits über alles. So I'm going to also quote from Margaret Mead, who once said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And often in community bookstores like this, it's just a handful of people. And then it's on you, it's on us. Can we save a few bucks by going through Amazon? Of course. But what is the real price that we're paying when we're doing, saving a few bucks and enriching, Jeff Bezos, who happens to be Charlie Rose's favorite guest? Have any of you noticed? Charlie Rose has got this very popular talk show on PBS. Everybody admires him. He speaks complete sentences. He knows how to use an adverb. Very talented interviewer. I must say he's indefatigable. And his 3 favorite guests are who? Jeff Bezos, a certified war criminal, Henry Kissinger, and Thomas Friedman, an apologist for war criminals and for U.S. imperial policy. Those are the guys that, I guess there are not enough white men being represented in the media. I'm glad he's giving them, a fair shake because, we're a beleaguered minority, as you probably can tell. Howard Zinn said that small acts, when multiplied by millions, can transform the world. And that's what it's always been about in terms of historical change. Movements that start from below, not from great leaders waking up one day in the White House or in the Elysee Palace or in Westminster and saying, gee, this policy is wrong. We're destroying the environment. What's going to happen to future generations? It's never going to happen from that angle. It's going to come from below when people make noise, when people demand change and demand radical change, which is really in terms of the climate crisis that we are facing. This collision course that we are on with Mother Nature, this war of destruction on Pachamama and Gaia, it has to be reversed. And it cannot be reversed by moving deck chairs on the Titanic. Because that's what these guys, and they're mostly guys, are masters of. They're masters of deceit. They're masters of deception. So they want you to believe, you could drive your Prius, it's called a Pius in Santa Fe, because people feel very virtuous when they're driving their Priuses. And we can you can recycle your cardboard, your glass, your plastic. You can compost your vegetables and your fruit, and have the right light bulbs and things like that. But these are just incremental, minute changes, and what's required is fundamental change in the economic system. But they're masters, and Richard Wolff talks about this, they're masters at throwing us cosmetics. A little rouge here, a little lipstick there, a little eye blusher here, a little makeup there, maybe a little blue streak in your hair, and you'll be as good as new. Well, it's not going to happen. And they're leading us down this path of seduction that, yes, we are doing something about the environment. Yes, they are doing something. They are doing something about the environment. They're destroying it. And you don't have to look very far, from the penthouse suite I occupy on the 4th floor of the Murray Hotel. I can see the coal trains going back and forth, driving from Helena this morning. I can't count the number of trains that we passed in driving and how long they were. And there's the coal out in the open. I mean, they don't even cover it. So all of that, the coal dust just goes into the atmosphere. And guess what? Where does it go from the atmosphere? Into our lungs. And so this is an amazing thing that's going on in Spokane and places like Moscow, Idaho, where I'll be next week, incidentally, Sandpoint, Idaho. People there are organizing, blocking these trains, stopping the movement of these, massive coal trains, and the injection of coal, into the atmosphere is further exacerbating global warming. I mean, this is not really a controversial issue. It should not be. But of course, in the propaganda system that we live in, that we're enveloped in and saturated in, we are, bombarded with, well, he said, she said, scientists say this, other scientists say that, the jury is still out. There's not unanimous opinion on this, whether there is in fact global warming. All of the propaganda is being paid for by the fossil fuel industry and great people like the Koch brothers, for example, who happen to have enormous investments in the fossil fuel industry. So from Howard Zinn also, I learned this to always try and use humor and inject some art and poetry. So in the course of the evening, you may be subjected to some of that. And while I have your attention, I'd love for you to sign the alternative radio sign-up sheet. Since you can't hear my program in Livingston, I can send you some information, just your name and address. I won't share it with anyone, and certainly not with the NSA, because they already have all your information. You're okay. You don't have to worry about that. But I can see, excuse me, there are a few people here that remember a class in school called penmanship. Remember that? It was the art of writing clearly. It's now lost on younger generations, but please write clearly. So, well, speaking of the NSA. Hey, hey, NSA, who are you going to spy on and in what way? Hey, hey, TSA, who are you going to pull over at the airport today? UAVs rain death from the skies. Pilotless drones will blow out your eyes. Government agents, look out! Here comes the FBI. IEDs, RPGs, WMDs, CIA, DEA, NSC, DHS, NSA. There goes the USA. There goes the USA. there goes the USA. So you know that scene in Casablanca where Bogart and the prefect of the French colonial police are walking off? We are walking off as well from center stage. We are walking away from the Constitution, from the Bill of Rights, from a livable environment. And so years ago, decades ago, the great Canadian songwriter and poet Leonard Cohen wrote a piece called "Democracy is Coming to the USA." If he were writing it today, he might put a question mark at the end of that, because it doesn't look like it's coming to the USA. It looks like it's going away from the USA as corporations have a stranglehold on the political system. I was talking to some students right here just a few hours ago, and talking about the political landscape of the country. And in the time I've been in Montana, I've seen that you have some fantastic candidates here, like your candidate for Senate, who's campaigning on a less government, more jobs program, slogan, and stands a good chance of winning, actually. But the whole political system is compromised, and it's compromised by money. It's compromised by Supreme Court decisions which have allowed corporate capitalism to just envelop both political parties. This has nothing really to do with liberals or conservatives or Democrats or Republicans, although some are qualitatively worse than others, but they're running in the same pack. So you could say that one is extremely pro-business, pro-corporate. You could say the other is less extreme. But pick your poison. We do have choices every November. Let's be honest. There's one choice: cyanide. The other choice, arsenic. Well, let's flesh that out. As Marx used to say, column A, column B. Column A, if you take arsenic, you'll die immediately. Okay, so you know the outcome of that. Now with cyanide, it's instant death. But if you take arsenic, you'll be in, of course, great pain, but you'll be able to live for a few months, and you might be able to, attend your daughter's graduation, or, celebrate a birthday or something like that. So there are choices out there, but, essentially, the political system is operating on behalf of the 1%. I mean, there are many more lobbyists in Washington than representatives of the so-called people, and our elections have essentially become auctions. And so, we've got to change the system. We need systemic change here in the country in order to protect the environment, in order to have a future for your children and grandchildren. That's what we're talking about. And talking to teenagers here who were kind of like, glassy-eyed when I was telling them about, the most important issue of the future, their future, is what's happening to the environment. The end of nature, as Bill McKibben wrote about in 1989, in one of the first books describing what was happening in terms of global warming. I was glad to see that our War Department, I don't like to use this euphemism, Defense Department, because they don't defend us against anyone. They carry out aggression, but in the Orwellian syntax, it means defense. So I attack you, that means I'm defending myself. You're helpless. I have an Air Force, submarines, Navy, tank divisions, special forces, helicopter gunships. I'm attacking you. I'm defending myself. You are the aggressor. We reverse the actual order of things. Well, recently, actually on Monday, the Pentagon announced that global warming, climate change, is a national security issue. It was page 14 of our most important newspaper, the New York Times. You think that if the Pentagon would make an announcement like that, if they made an announcement about ISIS, that was on the front page for the last 2 or 3 weeks to get people whipped up into a hysteria. We got to do something about this new problem. Where did this problem come from? What are its historical origins? What context? Does U.S. foreign policy have anything to do with the rise of ISIS? Gee, I don't know. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, these great feminist democracies in the Middle East, human rights, champions of human rights, centers of misogyny and patriarchy, and the most extreme kind of Islam, particularly that's practiced in Saudi Arabia. It's called Wahhabism. That's the Islam that ISIS has adopted. It's literally like no prisoners. It's my way or the highway. And they follow a form of Islam that developed around the 18th century by Muhammad al-Wahhab, who was a preacher and fundamentalist, who is a literalist, So I don't know if you've ever, I know we have a slight fundamentalist problem here in our own country, so I should be, pretty careful about the barbs I throw out there. But if you ever talk to, a Christian fundamentalist, they believe every word in the Bible is the absolute word of God, irrefutable, cannot be challenged. And so you have this also in Islam. It's interesting how the Abrahamic religions have this kind of extremist tendencies on at least in one part of them. And so it's Saudi Arabia that we have to thank, our allies, for ISIS. It is Turkey we have to thank for ISIS and other extremist groups that are now operating in Syria and Iraq. It was Turkey, our NATO ally, longtime supporter of the United States, that allowed its borders to be transit points for these Islamic fighters coming in from all over the world. And this deal we made with Saudi Arabia, nobody talks about Saudi Arabia. It's like, after Israel, these are the two big taboo topics in terms of U.S. foreign policy. No one has the courage to even utter the words and have some critical comments follow those particular words. But the deal, the Faustian bargain that we struck with Saudi Arabia, we are still reaping the benefits of. On February 12, 1945, Franklin D. Roosevelt, on his way back from Yalta, he was already in a terrible physical condition, and he would die exactly 2 months after this meeting, gets to the Suez Canal on the USS Quincy, where he meets Ibn Saud, the head of the Saud dynasty. I should tell you, if you don't know already, that these countries, these states like Kuwait and United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Qatar and Saudi Arabia, they're not really countries. You have to understand them as family-run businesses, like Walmart. They're the Waltons. So Saudi Arabia has the Saud family, Kuwait has the Sabah family, in Bahrain it's the Thani family, and so you have family-run businesses. Roosevelt there, first of all, he presents what did he give? He gave a gift to Ibn Saud, who gave him a sword in return. There they made a deal that the United States would protect the Saudi royal family and the monarchy, preserve it, as long as U.S. oil companies had access to Saudi oil. This was the big deal. And this is when the U.S. separated the British out from Saudi Arabia. And essentially, it's 1945 when the U.S. takes over the world. The entire post-war era since then, 69 years. I was born in 1945. I remember it well. Has been shaped by U.S. hegemony and domination. And guess what? Oil has been central to the formulation of U.S. foreign policy. Alliances with Saddam Hussein. You all remember? Does anyone remember the 1980s? You know who our greatest ally was in the Middle East? I'm putting aside Israel because that's an entirely off-the-shelf discussion. Saddam Hussein, Iraq. You know how Obama and Kerry were beating their breasts and sounding so virtuous about, territorial aggression of Putin and Russia and the Ukraine is unacceptable. It's a violation of international law. I mean, these are real howlers, man. When these guys come out and talk about international law, the one state in the world that is almost in constant violation of international law as our own country, in constant violation of the UN Charter and numerous UN Security Council resolutions, General Assembly resolutions that are not binding but are morally binding, let us say. And so Kerry and Obama were talking about, there's no place for this kind of 19th century bullying. There's no place for big nations to bully small nations. And I'm thinking, wow, in my lifetime, let me see what big nation, maybe a big nation that I happen to live in and am a citizen of, let me see what small nations this big nation has bullied. What comes to mind? Let me see. How about Iran in 1953, destruction of democracy? How about Guatemala in the following year, destruction of another democracy? How about Laos in 1961 when Kennedy let loose the US Air Force and was conducting chemical warfare drops on Laos and then on Vietnam? How about Cambodia? How about the Dominican Republic? How about Panama? How about Nicaragua? How about El Salvador? How about Honduras? Should I keep going? Well, we don't have enough time. I have a list of countries that the US has either directly invaded or indirectly invaded through embargoes and other diplomatic means. I mean, it's an enormous list. Nevertheless, these guys can go on primetime TV in front of the press corps, who are essentially press. I know enough French to know what I'm saying here. They're prostitutes, they're lapdogs with laptops, that are sitting there, and they're just like stenographers to power. So when Kerry says, or Obama says, there's no place for big nations to bully small nations, people just raise their hand, excuse me? How about Panama in 1989? How about Iraq multiple times? How about all of these other actions? What about bombing Pakistan? What about Afghanistan? What about bombing Yemen, bombing Somalia? Can you keep up with the number of countries we're bombing? It's really, you need a scorecard. I know it's like the World Series is about to start. So we need to then know, which country what day is it? Then we'll know what country we're bombing. I mean, we have to, really strip away the layers of propaganda that we're, just bombarded with, that are, where the corporate media performs their societal function of keeping us in the dark and, getting us to focus on, well, maybe Kansas City will win the World Series since, it'll be the first time since 1985. Or, will Madonna adopt another orphan from Malawi? Or, will Brad Pitt and Angelina stay together? Maybe they'll get a divorce. I mean, who knows? Is Beyonce going to stay with Jay-Z? Let's talk about really important issues. So you have the media as a weapon of mass distraction, but also complicit in not challenging and interrogating the embedded assumptions of our so-called great leaders. And I'm talking about, right now, Obama and Kerry, who are just dripping with mendacities and are never called on it. They're talking about international law, and they're talking about the UN Charter, they're talking about the sovereignty of states. On the very day that Putin sent troops into Crimea, to actually, from the Russian perspective, to correct a historical wrong. In 1954, Khrushchev, who was Prime Minister of the Soviet Union then, and a Ukrainian, returned Crimea to Ukrainian sovereignty rather than under Russia. But leave that aside, I'm no fan of Putin and what he's doing. But the moral hypocrisy here is truly astounding and is, almost breathtaking. So, as someone has quipped, the U.S. likes to say it makes the world safe for democracy. It's actually making it safe for hypocrisy and double standards and quadruple standards. So one set of rules for the master and the master's servants, and another set of rules for everyone else. So if you're a designated enemy, and if you do something that we don't like, the wrath of the empire will be focused on you, as the Sandinistas found out in Nicaragua when they attempted to chart a different path from the decades-long dictatorship of Somoza, supported by the United States. So I know I'm throwing a lot of things out here. historical anecdotes and facts, and I hope you'll stay with me. Looking out, of course, from the Murray, it's right across the building across the street is the Mason Lodge, and there are all these Egyptian murals. Have you seen them? Now, Egypt's a really interesting case, particularly with U.S. foreign policy, because they had to do some real verbal gymnastics and intellectual flip-flops in order to process what's happened in Egypt in the last couple of years. You remember the uprising at Tahrir Square? This came at the end of the Mubarak dictatorship, which the U.S. embraced, supported for decades. In fact, Hillary Clinton boasted when she was Obama's Secretary of State in January of 2011, at the height of the Tahrir Square demonstrations, late January, early February, she said, "No country has done more for democracy in Egypt than the United States of America." And nobody laughed. They just sat there. The press corps performed their societal duty of being zombies, of not responding. Instead of if this were New York, someone would say, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding? You're joking, right? You're pulling my leg, right? You can't be serious." The U.S. has, backed Egypt to the hilt to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. Now, you know how Washington loves to say, "Oh, we love elections, we love democracy." Yeah. Again, look at the historical record and look at the rhetoric, and you'll see a slight gap. Maybe you'd call it an abyss, miles and miles wide. But, I don't want to prejudice your judgment. You look at the record and see what you come up with. So we love democracy, we love elections, except when the elections turn out the wrong way. So when Palestinians vote for Hamas, we can't have that. That's not the right outcome. When Chileans vote for Allende multiple times, we can't have that. That's the wrong outcome. When Guatemalans vote for Arbenz, we can't have that. That's the wrong outcome, And so when the Egyptians voted for the Muslim Brotherhood, all of a sudden, again, the U.S. had, we can't have that. And so there's a coup d'etat, a military coup, led by General Sisi, former head of Egyptian intelligence, and that might be an oxymoron too, like U.S. intelligence. We have 17 intelligence agencies with a budget approaching $100 billion, and they succeed at virtually nothing. They never saw ISIS coming. They never saw the collapse of the Soviet Union coming. They didn't see the fall of Iran coming, the Shah. They didn't see the fall of the Somoza dictatorship in Nicaragua. I mean, we're really getting our money's worth. If you want to have a serious congressional investigation, we should be looking at the track record of these buffoons. Because if they were in the private sector, they'd all be out of business. If they were running a grocery store like my father did for 40 or 50 years in New York, he'd be out of business, they'd be out in the street. But, they're protected by other government agencies in this, vast bureaucracy of so-called intelligence. So there's a coup d'etat in Cairo. The military takes over, overthrowing the democratically elected government of Mohamed Morsi. Now, again, was he perfect? Was he great? No, he wasn't. But if we're going to adhere, just look at the record of the United States. I mean, was George W. Bush perfect and great? Did he make mistakes? Did anyone try to overthrow him? No, sadly. Sorry if there's a government agent here. Please erase that. That could be considered seditious, whatever that means. So there's a clear military coup d'etat. What did the Obama administration call it? They called it restoring democracy. That's what was going on in Egypt. And now Egypt is making progress toward democracy. As dissent has been completely silenced, the press is muzzled, Egypt has turned into a militarized police state, and it's going to, again, become one of these failed post-colonial states where the military is making money hand over fist and the rest of the population is just scrounging for enough food to feed their families. Like even Human Rights Watch, which is not a very radical organization, incidentally, they were denied entry into Egypt just in the last couple of months, because their new report documents the thousands of people that have been killed under the military junta, the many more thousands who are in prison with no habeas corpus, with no right to a speedy trial, the use of torture, all of these things. They were prevented from entering the airport at Cairo. The State Department, again, Kerry, our policy is based on national security interests. Well, just imagine if Iran, which is a designated bad country, right? We have our good countries and bad countries. Imagine if thousands of Iranians were slaughtered in the streets of Tehran. What would the response of Washington be? I think it's fairly obvious. And the corporate media would be right behind them, beating the drums of war. We got to do something about this. This is horrendous. This is a massive crime against humanity. Where is the international community? That's an interesting term I want you to learn about tonight. Whenever you hear the word international community in the corporate media or NPR or PBS, it means those countries that go along with US policy. That's the international community. So on Israel or the Cuban embargo, if the US picks up the Marshall Islands, Palau, Nauru in these votes, that's the international community. I mean, in fact, the whole world is voting against them. And I think one of the side effects of global warming with rising ocean levels will be further embarrassment to the United States, because they're going to lose these votes in the UN of these small South Pacific islands that are bribed into voting for them, so that every General Assembly vote is not 192 to 2 being the US and Israel. They always vote together. So, why do these things happen? Again, I think talking about fiction is a good way of understanding things, but talking also about what happened in New York on September 21st, hundreds of thousands, as many as 400,000 people turned out to march for climate change. People demanding action, that we cannot continue business as usual. Priuses are not going to save us. We need radical action from Washington and from other world capitals. Otherwise, we are, as I said, on an absolute collision course with nature. Now, what interested me even more than the demonstration on the 21st was what happened the next day, which didn't get as much coverage. The demonstration did, because large crowds often get media coverage. It's easy to do. You stand up, you're an anchor, and behind me, people are marching with placards and are fervently demanding change on climate issues. What happened on Monday was the Rockefeller Brothers Fund disinvested from fossil fuel companies. Now, this was real news on several levels. First of all, there's lots of money involved, $55 billion. But who is Rockefeller? What does Rockefeller and that family have to do with fossil fuels? And the answer is a whole lot. John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil, which was the forerunner of Esso and then Exxon and today's ExxonMobil. He was also the owner of a coal mine in Colorado, not far from where I live, Ludlow, where he hired goons, Pinkertons, to slaughter immigrant workers who were demanding more rights and better pay. That was in 1913. So we just marked the 100th anniversary of that last year. So that's John D. himself. I remember, I think he had a cabinet level position, perhaps in the Coolidge administration. I'm not sure about that. Anyway, he was a notorious skinflint, and he asked, let's say it was Coolidge, he asked Hoover for a nickel. He said he wanted to call a friend. And Coolidge gave him a dime and said, "Here, call all your friends." But I want to read a poem about the Standard Oil Company from no less a great poet than Pablo Neruda of Chile, who died in 1973, just 10 days after the CIA coup, which destroyed democracy in that country and led to the death of Neruda's friend, Salvador Allende. in La Moneda Palace in Santiago. Their obese emperors from New York are suave, smiling assassins who buy silk, nylon, cigars, petty tyrants and dictators. They buy countries, police, seas, county councils, people, distant regions where the poor hoard their corn, like misers their gold. Standard Oil awakens them, clothes them in uniforms, designates which brother is the enemy. The Paraguayan fights its war, and the Bolivian wastes away in the jungle with its machine gun. A president assassinated for a mere drop of petroleum. A million-acre mortgage, a swift execution on a morning. A new prison camp for subversives in Patagonia. A betrayal, scattered shots beneath a petrolifless moon, petrol-filled, oil-filled moon. A subtle change of ministers in the capital, a whisper like an oil tide. And zap, you'll see how Standard Oil's letters shine above the clouds, above the seas in your home, illuminating their dominions. If we have time, there's another poem. He's really worth knowing, and there's some great translations of his work in Canto General, for example. The Alturas de Machu Picchu is just a fabulous meditation on what happened to the Inca and the Inca Empire, the heights of Machu Picchu. And from F. Scott Fitzgerald, to go to a kind of another topic, why is this cavalier attitude toward the environment so prevalent among the captains of industry? Who do you think, they're educated men, they're mostly men, they're mostly white. Why are they doing this? I mean, surely they know the destructive nature of this extractive fossil fuel industry, whether it's in, Stephen Harper's Canada, which has an even worse environmental, situation than the US does. It's hard to imagine. But Canada now, and particularly the province of Alberta, is like Texas on steroids. That's where tar sands is. I was in Edmonton very recently. And have you all seen the film Avatar? Mm-hmm. Some of you have? Well, that's what the landscape looks like. I mean, huge mounds, open pits, a gigantic anaconda. I mean, it makes anaconda look like a postage stamp in comparison. Enormous amounts of sand and water that has been, cleared to extract these tar sands. And one Canadian journalist describes tar sands, it looks like molasses and it smells like asphalt. But it is the most putrid, the most fecal of all of the fossil fuels that are out there. And if it's released, if the tar sands are in some shape or form, come to the surface and are either exported to China or to the Gulf of Texas, which is being discussed, and maybe a pipeline, Cushing, Oklahoma, then to the Gulf, it'll be game over for the climate. Those are the words of James Hansen, our foremost climate scientist, who was the first one in 1988 in a congressional hearing to warn the country that there was something happening with the environment, that there was a noticeable pattern, not just a pattern, not just like an occasional quirk in temperatures, but that there was a noticeable pattern in what was happening with the global climate. He was ignored at the time, as were 1,600 scientists, including 104 Nobel laureates, who warned human beings in the natural world are on a collision course. Human activities inflict harsh and often irreversible damage on the environment. If not checked, many of our current practices put at serious risk the future that we wish for human society and the plant and animal kingdoms, and may so alter the living world that it will be unable to sustain life in the manner that we know. Fundamental changes are urgent if we are to avoid the collision our present course will bring about. This is World Scientists Warning to Humanity, 1992, 4 years after James Hansen gave that testimony in Congress. Well, what's happened since then? There's been one climate summit after another, Rio, Kyoto, Durban, Copenhagen. There was just one in Warsaw. There's one planned in Paris. And what happens at these climate summits, right? When our great leaders from around the world gather, there's a lot of hand-wringing, there's a lot of breast beating, we got to do something, it's a very serious issue. Then there's a huge press conference, a group photo, and everybody's sipping their Chardonnay or Merlot or whatever it is they're drinking. And then they issue a press release about, we're green. We love the environment. We love Mother Nature. We want to protect, the future generations from any kind of depredation resulting from climate change. And then they go home and it's business as usual. What's the price of oil today? How much, copper can we extract? How much, iron ore or bauxite can we remove from the earth? So it's a charade. And, we're being led by the nose, like into oblivion. In The Great Gatsby, Fitzgerald wrote about a certain mindset, I think, which is exemplified here. They were careless people. They smashed up things and creatures. Then they retreated back into their money or their great carelessness or whatever it was that kept them together. They retreated and let other people clean up the messes they had made.